If you've watched this channel before, you'll know how I really dislike the exposure triangle as a concept to try and determine the exposure in your digital images. I just think it's rubbish. I'm going to show you a better way. The way that I do it is I use the principle of the most important setting, the MIS principle. Everyone loves an acronym, right? Maybe not. Okay, with the MIS principle, we determine our most important setting, which could be our aperture, it could be our shutter speed, it could be our ISO. Not likely, but it could be. So we use this most important setting to determine our priority in the photograph. We may set our shutter speed to a particular setting because that's the effect that we want with our shutter speed. Then we use our aperture and our ISO to compensate, to get our exposure the way that we want it to be, which is not always the way other people want it to be. There's no such thing as a perfect exposure. There is just an exposure that suits you, your creative intent. So using this most important setting technique, you can determine your setting so much more quickly and so much more effectively. For instance, if I'm shooting out in bright sunlight, I'm using natural light, I might use my shutter speed as my most important setting. I might want to get a sharp image I'm hand holding, so I will use a shutter speed that's fast enough so that I'm not going to get any camera shake in my image. Once I've done that, I can set my aperture and or my ISO to give me the exposure that I want. So for example, I'm shooting natural light. I'm outdoors shooting a landscape or I'm shooting a portrait with natural light. I'm not using any flash, I'm not using any accessory light, so I'm pretty well open as to what shutter speed I can use. But I want to make sure when I'm hand holding that I don't get any camera shake in my image. So I'd like to use a shutter speed faster than 1/200th of a second, because that's going to prevent or make my camera shake less likely. So that's my most important setting in that situation. Then I might set my aperture to f8, f4, f1.4 for those people who like blurry backgrounds, and take an image. Then I can vary my ISO to give me the correct exposure that I want. Now in this situation, your most important setting is your shutter speed. Now I find that my shutter speed is the most creative setting that I can use. So that most of the time is my most important setting. If you're really into blurry backgrounds and you like the bokeh backgrounds, then your aperture may be your most important setting. In that case, you would set the maximum aperture that your lens is capable of. You would set your shutter speed to a setting that's going to work for you, maybe up to that 1/200th of a second or higher, and then you can vary your ISO to suit. Or you may prefer to keep your ISO as low as possible, set your aperture to the 1.4 or 1.8, and then just vary your shutter speed to get you the exposure that you're looking for. So you're using the aperture as your most important setting. Now, when I'm using flash, things come into it. When I'm using flash, I need to be sure that my flash synchronization speed is not exceeded. So my flash synchronization speed on my camera is 1/200th of a second or approximate. I like to go down to 1/160th of a second just to be safe in case I bump the shutter speed dial. And occasionally my camera doesn't give me 1/200th sync. So I'm generally shooting at 1/160th of a second. That's 1/160. That's the most important setting for me in that situation. Then I would vary my aperture, my ISO, to give me my background exposure the way I want. Because we all know that when we're shooting with flash, our camera settings will determine our background. Then I turn my flash on and vary my flash up or down to get the light on my subject. My most important setting there is still my shutter speed. Those people who like the bokeh in the background can use their aperture and vary the other two. Now the way I generally work with my ISO may be different to how you do it, but this is the way that I find works best for me. As soon as I get to a location, I'll assess the light that's in that location. If I'm working in the bright sunshine, I might set 100 or 200 ISO, and I pretty much leave it there for most of the day. I don't vary it very much. If the sun goes behind a cloud or if I'm shooting under a tree, I might sometimes change things, but most of the time I'll leave it the way it is. So that gives me just two options, my shutter speed and my aperture. If my most important setting is my shutter speed, then I just need to adjust my aperture to get my exposure the way I want it to. Again, it simplifies things down that little bit more. Now, when I get into creative photography, I may want to slow that shutter speed down so that I get a little bit of blur, a little bit of movement in that shot. Then my most important setting is still my shutter speed, because I might want to set 1/20th of a second or 1/10th of a second to get me that little bit of blur motion in my subject. Or if I'm shooting natural light and I'm doing intentional camera movement, such as this, I might want to set my shutter speed to 1/10th of a second or 1/4 of a second, depending on the effect that I want from moving my camera. So my most important setting is my shutter speed again, and my aperture is secondary. My aperture is just used to give me the exposure that I want in my image. This is the way I work. It may not suit you, but I've taught this to many of my students and they think it's the best way to do it too. Most of them, not all of them. Now, all of this information I've just given you is dependent on you hand holding your camera. If you're using a tripod or a monopod, then you can lower that shutter speed that little bit more to prevent the camera shake. You don't need to keep it up to 1/200th because your tripod or your monopod is going to allow you to drop that shutter speed down a little bit lower, which gives you more access to various different apertures that you want. If we're using constant light to light our subject, I shoot people, so most of the time I'm lighting my people separately from my background. If I'm shooting constant light to light my people, then that shutter speed comes into it again because I don't want to blur my subject. Most of the time my constant light's not as bright as my flash. So if I'm using constant light, I'm usually struggling a little bit to get my shutter speed up there fast enough so I can hand hold. It's not a problem if I have monopod or tripod, but my shutter speed again is my most important setting. So think about this MISS principle. Try it yourself. To me, it seems much more logical because I can be more accurate and I can be more creative. It's more logical to me to do it this way. Think about it yourself. Your most important setting. Most of the time for me, it's my shutter speed. It may be aperture for you. It may be ISO. But think about it. Try it yourself. Let me know in the comments what you think. Or maybe don't let me know in the comments what you think. That's okay. I don't mind a little bit of criticism from time to time. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this has helped you. I'll see you next time.